Tunisian students. So حظا سعيدا.
Okay, so thank you very much. That was a great introduction. I need that every time I get up to present, I think. My name is Aziz Fatnassi. I'm a Ph.D. student like Hussein said, and an Ed.D. student in LCLE. Most of my research has focused on Tunisia as a whole. A lot of it has been linguistic research, linguistic anthropology. Mostly memory, identity, and construction through narrative. Recently, I've switched gears. So I spent a couple years teaching in Tunisia, working for a nonprofit called Identities, which does programs with not only affluent Tunisian students, but what they call at-risk students. So they have a program on the weekends called Access, which allows students who can't afford classes to come and take English courses. So, I'd like to start with the origins of Tunisian education and the origins of Tunisian identity as a whole. On the left is a picture of the first president of Tunisia, Habib Bourguiba. On the right is a picture of a French-Algerian philosopher many of you may know, Jacques Derrida. What do they have in common? Besides the fact that they're both French speakers, both of them were trained in local North African education methods and in French methods. Bourguiba studied law in France. Derrida was obviously involved in philosophy. But they both bring up a similar point. And that point is that the history of any culture presupposes an objective, presupposes a location that the culture would like to get to. And it also presupposes that this future identity is not a given. It's not known in advance. But what it is a difference between the accumulated history of the culture and the prospective futures of its citizens. So, the way I approached my study was through three different lenses. When I look at a language policy problem, I think of macro, micro, and mesostructures. Macrostructures are tensions between what is known as the local and the global, the tension between outside interests and inside interests. Micro would be the level of personal and familial expectations. Your parents want you to go to college, they want you to speak English, French, so on and so forth. And mesostructures are essentially the structures imposed by the constraints of language planning policy. For example, if you're taught English from a very young age, you'll grow up speaking it perhaps better than if you learn it, say, beginning in high school. So to access these different levels of discourse, I've chosen three voices. The first, the macro voice, is the voice of Habib Bourguiba, the person who essentially set in motion this language planning policy. The micro voice is the voice of the informants in my study, of which there are 6. They're Tunisian youth between the ages of 18 and 30. And the reason I chose Tunisians between the age of 18 and 30 is, as many of you may know, there was a little thing called the Arab Spring. It ignited in Tunisia and was fueled primarily by the desires and wants of this group of the population. People who had just recently completed educations and were hoping to gain some employment. Then, of course, I have the meso-level narrative provided by Tunisian language educators. So policy construction is never a solitary thing, unless you're living in a dictatorship. Then even then, you still have an oligarchy to support you. But the narrative provided by Tunisian language educators will give us perspective on how English is situated in this discourse of Tunisian identity and how it's interplayed with other existing languages. So, navigating the waters towards identity. So I'd like to begin with the Bourguiba vision. As I said, Bourguiba was, and many consider, the founding father of the modern Tunisian state. And Bourguiba's big thing was that education was an imperative. To improve yourself, to improve the country, to improve the quality of life, you had to work through effort. So there's this excellent quote. I've always felt that the fault lies not with men, but with their education, their way of looking at things, their mental framework. And these can be changed for the better by dint of intelligent and persistent effort. So there has to be some foresight into your planning. You can't just delve in and say we're going to do a bunch of different development projects and hopefully people will learn what we want them to learn. You have to target those things and actively work to improve them. So the objective for Bourguiba was to introduce primary education broad sweepingly across the country. So Tunisia was a French protectorate up until 1959. And the Tunisian protectorate had two different school systems, a French school system, which was for French students and European students, and then a local Arab school system, Arabic language school system, that was for the local people. There was also development of two different higher level institutions. There was the Zaytuna University, which was traditionally Arabic language religiously based. And then there was Siddiqui College, which was more of a French style system. And of course, selection into both of these two colleges was very, very, very controlled by social position. So if you were accepted into the Siddiqui College, you were trained in French, you were taught these mannerisms of the elite. And if you were trained at Zaytuna University, you were given more of a classical education and Quran and so on and so forth. So there's already a language difference that exists. Ooh, that's not good. Let's go back. There we go. Okay. So, when we think about revolution, we think about changes in identity. Often the picture that we get is this. So we have this face-to-face physical confrontation between the state and the individual, or the state and the subaltern. The way that I like to conceptualize these things is not through overt forms of violence. In fact, there's a great peace studies researcher named Johan Galtung who said violence can be conceptualized as opportunities. And that is, if you're negated the ability to achieve your potential, you're negated the ability to get to your opportunity, there exists violence. And obviously this will manifest in physical forms. So what I decided to do was situate language education planning policy within a political opportunity structure. Essentially, a political opportunity structure examines actions as preconceived understandings of the outcomes of those choices. So actors have limited resources, limited ability to mobilize those resources, so they use them to the most effective manner. And the quotes that came out of much of my research kind of supported that. So how does political opportunity structure apply to language? Many of you are wondering that right now, I'm sure. Language in Tunisia has always been a political decision. If you spoke French, you belonged to this kind of idealized upper class. If you spoke Arabic, again, there are social connotations for speaking those languages. Similarly, English has arrived on the scene and has had a third vision of what a Tunisian identity might be. So you get a quote where a speaker will say, "It's like there are no more jobs for people here, Tunisia and France. I mean, yes, I can work and do something to keep my time, but I don't make anything from it. I feel it is a waste. To get this education here, I have this degree, and I cannot do anything with it." This is the catalyst for political action. So, drawing upon this.
Was that someone from the French or the Arab school?
This is from the French school. So I should guess fast forward today. French and Arabic are taught simultaneously side by side. The colonial system has hence been demolished. Yay. And so students are often fluent, as some will attest, in French and Arabic and a multitude of other languages. Traditionally, it's been a two-language system. So French has been the language of science and mathematics, and Arabic has been the language of history and social studies and things like that. So there's already a differentiation in language values. So people value French as this academic, studious language, and Arabic is kind of more of this cultural language, maintaining heritage. So we have English that comes on the scene. And how does it come on the scene? Well, social media. So social media has played a huge role in the reshaping of language identities, language politics, so on and so forth. Facebook is one of the #1 used sites in Tunis, as you can see, with this beautiful graffiti artwork. It's also enhanced the self-reflexivity of Tunisian English speakers. So they want to get this experience speaking with native speakers, they want to develop their language abilities, they want to access an outside world. And again, this brings us back to the topic of the revolution. The revolution, as I said, was primarily fueled by students, and those students wanted this open access. So English was at once this medium to advance yourself within the country, but it also becomes a medium to advance yourself beyond those borders. It becomes this international language. There's also a concept of uniqueness. So English language education in Tunisia takes place in a number of institutions. You have it in public schools, you have it in private schools, and you have it being taught by independent contractors. The quality of public school English language education is not very high. Most students actually will augment that. So they'll take classes in public school and then take private language classes. And those classes for about a month are $600 US. So if you imagine people who live there make about, on average, $900 to $1,000 US a month, and they're paying $600 to take English language classes. This is a massive use of resources. And again, it must not simply be that they love the language, but that there's some political motivation or some other motivation behind it. One thing that's been noted, and this is where I'll bring in the ideas of migration. One thing that's been noted is that English has become the language of technology. It's become the language of education, science, medicine, business, and international world politics. And this is not something that's lost on countries of North Africa, countries that have traditionally had very closed relations with the outside world. It's obvious in migration. So if you look at migration patterns, over the past 5 years, migration to North America has sped up, while migration to Europe has decreased. We can see that again in two different lights. So we can see it as a choice of English over French or European languages, or a choice of a new economy versus an old economy. So again, you have the dialogue of colonial contact between Europe and North Africa, and you have this new freedom or liberating economic policy of the West. So again, I get back to this idea of privileging the extra local over the local. So as I said, there's always been this kind of appeal of different languages to different portions of the Tunisian population. I'd like to give you an example of the French version. So this is from a quote in 1974, the height of Tunisian French language education. The fact that French is used almost exclusively for mathematics and sciences may lead many to think, rightly or wrongly, that Arabic is unfit for the acquisition of modern knowledge, especially exact sciences and technology. To the academic prestige of French must be added its social prestige. It is the tongue of social promotion and has definite snob appeal. I'm not sure about the snob appeal, but French does have this foothold, and English is quickly supplanting that. So Bourguiba, as I was saying, was the first president of Tunisia until 1987, when he was overthrown in a coup by Zine El Abidine Ben Ali. So this period began another change. So we have 1959 to 1987. where there are French language institutions, and 1987 to 2011, January of 2011, where there are movements towards English. So the movement towards English can be seen as a reconceptualization of this ideal citizen. So the ideal citizen thereby becomes somebody who's being trained to enter the workforce, a worker who can meet the demands of the competitive global market and preserve, or better yet, boost the nation's place in the market. What this means for those who are members of Tunisia's educational system is a shift in consciousness from understanding multilingualism as a means of social advancement within Tunisian European society to an increasing viability in the global education market. So this is reflective in planning policy with things such as the GERMA, which is the Expert Committee on Reforming the English Maîtrise, where Tunisia is actually taking steps to improve that public education. So students don't have to go spend $600 a month to get language training. They can get it from non-native speakers, Tunisian non-native speakers, and they can do it for free using public resources. So, seeing as how it's such an economic burden and there's so many different socio-cultural constraints behind it, I'd like to look at Campano's statement. So Campano says, our social identities we are coming to learn may always be in the act of becoming more fluid and composed through our ever-evolving affiliations of our lives. Educational reforms typically do not take into account those histories of inequality that constrain students. This top-down paradigm ironically renders pedagogically irrelevant the complexities and the promise of multiculturalism and literacy. The shift in English language has a number of different connections. One, of course, is to people's desires to speak English. Another is, quite bluntly, economic. So as Tunisia began this kind of modernization and transition to a more open economy, English became more and more important. And it became a larger part of daily Tunisian life. Students who wanted to achieve needed to differentiate themselves, and English was the means to do that. It also became a way to standardize national identity. Identity is obviously very tied into language. French and Arabic have traditionally been those languages. With this re-shift towards the West, English has taken up this place. So I will conclude because I think I'm almost out of time. What does this mean for language educators? What does this mean for LCLE in general? What it means is we need to rethink the way that we approach teaching languages in foreign contexts. We can't go into a situation and assume that English is the be-all, end-all of our job. English is always tied, and any language education is always tied to internal desires to self-identify, internal desires for future aspirations, political motivations. And so anytime we step into this context, I feel it's important that we apply some structure, maybe not political opportunity structure, but we apply some structure to give us a deeper understanding and help us be more effective and socially conscious.